Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Author Chat. I'm Dianne Dotson, and tonight I have Jonathan Maberry, New York Times bestselling author and five-time Bram Stoker Award winner, anthology editor, comic book writer, magazine feature writer, playwright, content creator, and writing teacher and lecturer. He was named one of today's top 10 horror writers, and his books have been sold to more than 24 countries. So welcome, Jonathan.
Glad to be here, Diane. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So we'll talk about multiple genres tonight because you're a cross-genre writer. So the first questions I'm going to have for you are sort of general, and then we'll kind of dig in a bit. So first of all, when did you know or at least suspect that you would like to write science fiction?
I got interested in science fiction before I wanted to write it, but I got interested because of writers. The librarian from my middle school was the secretary for a couple different clubs of professional writers, a group of fantasy writers in Philly, and then a group of science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers that met informally in New York and at a publisher's penthouse. And anytime there was a meeting, or it was actually a cocktail party, they called a meeting, she would drag me along, and I got to meet, Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, Harlan Ellison, Arthur C. Clarke, and all these incredible, legendary science fiction and horror writers and fantasy writers. And they knew that I wanted to write and assumed I wanted to write fiction. So they kept giving me advice on how to write fiction. And it wasn't really until well into the 2000s that I decided I actually did want to write fiction. My goal was to write nonfiction. And I did write a bunch of science-related things over the years in nonfiction. But it was around the time I was working on my third horror novel, that I decided I wanted to start writing science fiction. So my fourth book is a weird science thriller called Patient Zero that combines elements of horror, elements of action, but real world hard science. And I am definitely a science junkie.
Cool. So so I know you're not supposed to reveal your secrets as a magician or anything like that, but when you're researching for something like science fiction, how hard into the science do you get?
I go pretty deep. In fact, I call myself a research junkie, which is not at all an exaggeration. So, for example, when I was doing Patient Zero, my first weird science thriller, I knew I wanted, the book dealt with zombies, but I didn't want it to be, the dead rose, we don't know why. So I started looking into prion diseases. I started looking into epidemiology, a little bit of parasitology, bioweapons research science, and a bunch of other fields, a lot of stuff that led to the development of the CRISPR gene editing technology. I talked to some of the people who would eventually be the superstars of that. I just mined them for as much information as they could share, and had some fun with it too, because there are two questions I always ask these researchers, or these scientists, when I do this. At the end of all the other interview questions, I ask them, what don't I know enough about your field to even ask you? Because I'm a science junkie, I'm not a scientist. So I assume that my guesses about science are, maybe slightly more well-informed than the average person, but not on the level of a science writer. And the other question I ask is, what's the weirdest or coolest thing happening in your field right now? Because those sometimes give you the greatest and most interesting things. And a lot of that has worked its way into my novels, those anecdotes.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I can appreciate that, because since I write science fiction and I'm a science writer, I kind of get ideas as I do my research and then when I talk to someone, I interview a scientist. There's a lot of fun that you can have with that, kind of go crazy. So
yeah, and also with that, one of the things that I find very interesting is you assume that somebody is an expert in a field, and then you find out that field has lots of other spin-off fields of expertise. For example, when I was doing a book dealing with vampires, I wanted to know about, with zombies, the book, I wanted to know about bite strength, because, in the movies, you see a zombie take a chunk out of somebody's arm and bite through a leather jacket. And I asked a pathologist about that, and he said, well, really, you should talk to a forensic odontologist. And what's that? And he said, it's an expert on bites and bite marks. So they put me in touch with that specific expertise. And it was fun because that expert had, in fact, spent a lot of time thinking about zombies, vampires, werewolves, dragons, and other things because they're scientists and they had frat parties when they were in medical school. Yeah, they're every scientist I met's a super geek. So, which
True.
is why I love them so much. And they were able to give me information that allowed me to write about zombies in ways that other people don't, because not everyone does their homework. And I do. And that, I think, I feel that shows in the writing.
Oh, it definitely shows. Like it's sort of, it's a little bit intimidating to see that, but that's also kind of why I wanted to ask, is because like you research so much and you're so in depth that, I mean, just comes through on the page instantly. You really feel like this is not fluff. This is smart sci-fi. So
Well, thanks. And one thing that kind of allowed me to get to that level of information is I was actually trained as a journalist. I went to journalism school.
ah,
So I was trained how to ask the right questions so that you get the kind of answers that no one else has.
makes
Um,
sense.
Probably the bridge, the work that was kind of the gateway to that was I did a nonfiction book called Zombie CSU: The Forensics of the Living Dead, in which I interviewed hundreds of experts on all these different fields, everything from first responders, like how would EMTs react when they're trying to take vitals from somebody who we know is a zombie, but they don't know is a zombie, that, and then working all the way up through the different fields of science, the clergy, the press, the military, and so on. And each person in each field was able to give me reasonable insights that someone who's not in their field would never think of. And that makes me as a novelist especially look a lot smarter than I am, or a lot more educated in science than I am, because I'm tapping these people who are really, really brilliant people, brilliant experts. And of course, they get thanked in the acknowledgements page, which is
Right.
bragging rights for them. So it's a win-win.
Truly, yeah. And so, when you're coming from your background, you first worked for a while in nonfiction, right? So
Mhm.
do you think that helped you with writing science fiction, or do you think even your martial arts background helped you, like inform any of the genre?
Actually, both of them did. The journalism school was interesting because my journalism professor we hated at the time because he was such a monster. And then I realized that he was actually preparing us for not only the real world, but to excel in the real world. Like, for example, on Fridays when we would come into class, there would be a topic on the board. We were not given any prep, so we didn't know anything about the topic. We had 10 sheets of paper, a typewriter, because this is 1976 when this was happening,
Yeah.
and he would set a timer for 90 minutes. You would have to write 2,000 words on that topic. Um, and you couldn't make it up. So if you didn't know it, you'd have to be able to find a perspective that suited your lack of knowledge, because you can't just fake it. And then he would put on an album, back then it was vinyl, of sound effects, car crashes, babies crying, explosions, real loud while we're writing.
Huh.
And his thought was, a reporter, because he was training us to be that, should be able to write this at a crime scene, a fire scene, wherever. And it always made me thought of what Harlan Ellison used to say, that he could write in a burning building, because he used to do something where he'd sit in the window of a bookstore and write short stories.
How
And
did it do that and have that constant, environmental surrounding? It's hard to
yeah,
do.
you just, it was, I was trained to disregard it. I'm aware of it, but I'm not giving my attention to it in a deliberate way. It's on, becomes a kind of background noise. And it's why now that, like when I sit down to write, I don't wait for the muse to hit me. I sit my butt in a chair and I write. And martial arts also help with that too, because, in a fight, and I've been doing jujitsu for 58 years now, and I was a bodyguard and everything else. In a fight, you can't be distracted by what's going on around you, but you need to be aware of it. So there's that separation of awareness. There's the part of you that's collecting data, the part of you that's that's problem solving in the moment that it's happening. And that's actually been really useful as a writer too, to be able to write anywhere.
So you kind of cross genres. You're known for your horror, you're known for thrillers and action and sci-fi and comics and V Wars, of course, on Netflix, your Netflix show. And so I think subgenres of sci-fi are always interesting depending on when they're lumped in. What do you think your favorite subgenre of sci-fi is?
Um, the science fiction thriller is really the model that I use for a lot of things. I even use that same model when I write something supernatural, but it's the
Hmm.
same thing. Because a thriller is a type of story structure that I love. Like suspense is all about the moment it's happening. A mystery is about solving something that happened. But thrillers are usually the race against time to prevent something bad from happening or something worse from happening. And in science fiction, often that's whether it's a disaster about to happen, the asteroid going to hit, a spaceship going off course, all these different things. There's still that worst case scenario they're hurtling toward. Can we prevent it? Can we avert it?
Yeah.
And that model's always been my favorite. And the reason it was my favorite is Richard Matheson, who wrote I Am Legend. That book is a template for almost all apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic thrillers that have come since. The book came out in 1954, and sadly, they have never done an accurate film version of it. So the book is really worth reading to understand how you can just put the science in and also inform the reader while racing against time to prevent something from happening. So that model's what I use all the time. So I consider it my underlying genre.
Right.
In terms of if I had to pick a specific subgenre of science fiction, it would most likely be the terrorist use of weapons of science, because
Like
what's that?
bioweapons.
Yeah, bioweapons or other things. Like the next book I'm going to do in the Joe Ledger series will be called Discord, and it deals with sound-based weapons.
Oh,
Whether it's those devices used on our embassies in different countries where it may have been Cuba, it may have been China, directing sound weapons to make everybody sick, all the way up to the theories and conspiracy theories about the HARP, sound weapons.
whoa, yeah. Which I didn't know much about until recently.
Yeah, so I'm just starting the research in that. I'll be starting to write that book probably the end of September, beginning of October. So it gives me plenty of time to do a lot of research, and I just started my research on it now.
Cool. So what were your favorites when you were forming your writing gene, sort of like, so you're about to express your writing genes? What were your favorite sci-fi classics or maybe off the wall stuff that influenced?
Boy, there's a bunch. I mean, I Am Legend, of course. And by the way, the reason I really like that is it's the first time there have been science fiction horror, which is its own genre, science fiction horror. There have been science fiction horror, books and movies before that, but rarely did they give you the science. I mean, Frankenstein, roughly they mention galvanization, but that's about it. Jekyll and Hyde, he mixed chemicals, but they don't say what. Whereas in I Am Legend, he talks about the Bacillus vampiri and the actual process of analyzing blood and so on. So he gave you the science, which to me made the horror scarier because it was more grounded in the real world.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. I liked the early Michael Crichton stuff, even though his dinosaur science ultimately was proven wrong.
Yeah.
Loved a lot of the stuff about human evolution, like Theodore Sturgeon's More Than Human. Childhood's End was one of my favorites. I love that book. It's an absolutely brilliant book. So those types of stories where it's usually something so far out of the norm that regular science can only hit a certain point of understanding, and then the people have to go into the field, which is usually where bad things are happening, in order to get more information in order to solve it. War of the Worlds is a great example. And so I love stuff that has an action element that puts people in the position where they have to up their game in order to be able to deal with whatever science weapon is being thrown in their direction.
Very cool. So do you want to talk about some of the works that you've done that kind of either that have already been out or are out now or coming soon that can tap into sci-fi? We can also dip into some other genres and talk about your other works too. So.
Well, my Joe Ledger series is my most well-known series of science fiction thrillers. The new one, I just got my advanced reading copies today, so the new one will be out July 13th, and it's the 12th book in the series, and it's a nice big fat 160,000 word novel. Lots of words in that. Yeah, the science in this particular book deals with enhanced cybernetics to enhance physical performance. in a military sense, and also exoskeletons and combat machinery. So a lot of that is the science I've researched for that, biomechanics, cybernetics, and so on. So that every book in that series has a different kind of science to it. Prion diseases in one, transgenic science in another. I did a book called Predator One that dealt with drones right before they became commercially available. I wrote a novel about why that could be a bad thing and some of the bad uses that could be put to. GPS hacking and autonomous drive system hacking, all of which were in the news by the time the book actually hit the bookstores.
Oh, well, that brings up Pandemica and the timing of that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So Pandemica.
Crystal ball over there. It's like I just barely see it. No.
Yeah. So Pandemica was a comic book that I wrote for IDW, same company I did V-Wars for, and the premise is that a group of scientists that are funded by an extreme right-wing militant group believe, erroneously, that there is a such thing as pure Aryan DNA, white DNA. And so they try to create bioweapons, as, by the way, many other countries have tried to do, try to create ethnic-specific bioweapons to reduce the number of and control other ethnic groups. And of course, these things get get off the leash, and we find out that, in fact, there is no such thing as white DNA. In fact, the purest DNA on the planet is African DNA in certain areas where it hasn't mixed with other cultures. But white DNA is not, there is no such thing as pure white DNA. So naturally, a bioweapon that's targeting other genetic lines is likely to cause mutations within someone who, the average American has percentages of all different types of DNA in them. And that got out of hand. That comic started coming out issue by issue, and then then COVID hit. The final issue was actually delayed by months because the comic book stores got shut down, and there was a pushback on a comic about an outbreak of a disease and a government that was not supporting logical scientific research, which is what the comic was about. And I wrote that in 2019, by the way. And COVID, by the way, also didn't help V-Wars any, because a TV show about a pandemic that is sweeping the world and for which there was no cure was not as popular as it could have been.
Timing.
But being a predictive writer, what's that?
Maybe we could play the lottery or do stocks or something.
I tell you, it's
impressions.
Being a predictive writer is a challenge, because what we do is we look at current science, not at what the public knows. But you read trade journals, you talk to scientists, you find out what they're working on now that'll reach the public in X number of years, and you want to write about the stuff the public doesn't know about yet, but they will. And sometimes you hit it right on the money, and it's disturbing. And that actually brings up back to one of your earlier questions about the science fiction I like. There was a pulp series called Doc Savage. That I absolutely loved. From 1934 to 48, I think it was, 170 novels, give or take. And these books were written back in the 30s. And, Doc Savage was a super scientist. He had what they called eye prints, which were retina scans, telephone answering machines, planes that could fly 500 miles an hour, which you did not have in 1934. And all these other scientific devices that he had, or the villains had, that were there because Lester Dent, the guy behind the novels, was simply reading scientific journals and thinking, well, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
That's what we do.
And then when you're writing, from my perspective, when I write science and I'm asked by a company or someone to project future trends, then that gets interesting. And so you have to draw on the sci-fi side. So I feel like we're always kind of pushing and pulling between science and sci-fi, because you need people who are visionaries to think what could be, what might be, what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, and then
what's interesting about that is sometimes something is really predictive, but the time scale in which they assume this predictive thing will occur is often skewed. Great example is Star Trek.
Right.
The computer systems on the Enterprise were like futuristic in 1967. They're laughably archaic now.
And now we have
Yeah,
all these back borders,
right. So when you see a show like Star Trek Discovery, which is set and just before the Star Trek TV, so the original classic TV show, they had to go with much more sophisticated computers, but it no longer looks like it fits in the classic Trek world. It's because our progress in science, like we could not have predicted how fast from the 60s to now computers developed. It was lightning fast.
Well, then everything's sort of accelerating, discovery and then with the help of AI, different treatments and vaccines for COVID, for example, using AI to come up with that, you just couldn't do it in the same time frame. So who knows what's next?
Yeah, who knows what's next? I'm still waiting for flying cars, because I think that's
we were told.
Well, I want a personal jetpack that does not set fire to my feet, as most of the jetpacks in science fiction would. A Rocketeer would be setting fire to his feet. I'm just saying.
It was cool though.
It was so cool.
But yeah, there's that little thing, and that you can't turn your brain off when you're watching certain things. Like the keyboard in Aliens, when Bishop's got the keyboard, you're like, would he really have a keyboard, first of all? And then the Sulaco's challenges there.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah.
You lose a little bit of there, but the rest of it's so great. It still mostly holds up.
I found that being a science nerd is not popular when you're watching a movie with friends.
No, it's really not.
I get the same thing.
Military movie, the same way, right?
Yeah, and I get the same thing with martial arts with fight scenes.
Yeah.
People want to hit me over the head with something to shut me up, and so I've had to learn to keep my mouth closed, even though I'm like, when you're watching something.
Well, so like talking about movies and things like that, what would be the one thing that would tip people off to your being human or not? So let's say it's like a void comp. Maybe you're a zombie, maybe you're a human, maybe you're an android. What would tip people off that you're human or not? First of all, that you're human.
Ability to be startled. It's kind of hard to startle a robot unless they are weirdly programmed to be startled, in which case that would be,
Like C3PO.
Yeah. But I think being startled would be the thing. You pop a balloon behind a robot, it's going to turn and look. A person's going to jump 5 feet in the air.
Right. True. Okay, so what would tip people off that you weren't human?
Probably a little ports in the back of my neck. That might give a.
Collars?
Huh? I wear the high collars to hide that port.
Maybe a cape.
Yeah, and the fact that I cast no reflection. So that.
That's a dead giveaway, literally. All right. So what do you want to talk about that you're working on right now or that is coming soon?
Well, yesterday I just finished my 41st novel, which is my first epic fantasy. And the only science in that is the science of swordplay. Because I went a different direction. I kind of got tired of swordsmen in stories, so I had a knife fighter. My main character doesn't like swords; he prefers fighting with daggers, and that is kind of a preference of my own. In that, even though I've been doing kenjutsu, Japanese swordplay, for many, many, many years. If I was in a fight, I would choose a short, light-bladed weapon, something sharp, good durable steel, but light, because I prefer to move fast rather than with power. I'm a big man. I'm 6'4". I'm built like Sasquatch. But my martial arts instructor trained all of the big guys in class to be fast rather than to rely on strength, because we have just our body mass and height gives us pounds pressure per square inch, gives us mass that we can use. It gives us more physical power, but people expect that of us. They expect grab. They expect a big power punch. I was taught to be fast instead, which is a whole different kind of science. The way in which the body moves using relaxation, body shifting, and so on. That is its own specific science. So I wanted to give my my character Joe Ledger and my character Kagan from Kagan the Dam, the fantasy novel, both use knives because the knife isn't heavy enough to drag on the hand. So the hand will move fast without the heavy drag of a sword. A sword you can see. A short knife will cut you, and you're cut. You don't see it. That speed, I think, is a nice little novelty within the story. But I had to make sure that when he's fighting someone who has a sword, there's a logic to how he defeats a sword. So that's the only bit of science in it. But that novel was epic fantasy, and I got to play with some fun things by adding a war between two factions, one of which worships Cthulhu, and one of which worships his half brother Hastur, which are both from. Hastur doesn't get as much love as Cthulhu, but he's in the same cosmic horror genre, and I had a great time, with the different cults there. Cthulhu's cult is actually the good guy cult, which is also a switch.
Yeah, that is definitely a switch.
So I had a lot of fun with that story. There's also deals with each book in the series. It'll be an ongoing series. Will deal with a little bit of the development of a new kind of archaeology. The story is set 50,000 years from now.
Oh,
so
okay.
Our science society has completely crumbled. There's no evidence left of any of our cities or monuments. They wouldn't be there 50,000 years in the future. Even the pyramids would be gone. But in the glaciers, there was a global, flooding and ice age and so on. The glaciers have artifacts from our time in them. So these scholars are mining them and trying to figure out what the hell these things are. One of the things they find is the Necronomicon, the Cthulhu book. But they also find some zombies, which will show up in a later book in the series. That's how the other world ended.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun with that. It's 172,000 words I wrote in 4 months, and I was friggin' exhausted when I finished yesterday.
But you're doing so. Congrats! And
yeah.
How many books did you say there would be in this series?
Well, we sold the first 2, and the publisher wants to publish them 6 months apart. So as soon as I have a short novel, a 50,000 word novel to write next, and then I write the next Kagan book. So they'll be out, in spring and summer of next year.
Awesome.
But my next book is post-apocalyptic science fiction.
Ooh, can you talk about it?
I can to a degree. It's under non-disclosure agreement. What I can say is it is a prequel to a very popular science fiction movie from about a decade ago. And there is going to be a TV series prequel to it as well. Ooh. They hired me, the company that did the movie hired me to write a novel, which I wrote last year, that makes sense of the first movie, because there were some things that don't appear to make sense, but you need more backstory to make them make sense. So I wrote that. The guy who's doing the TV series read that book and decided to fold some of my characters into his TV show, which is cool. And we'll have one of the Star Wars actors as a lead actor for the show. Again, can't say names. But they just asked me to write another book in that series, and they need it by the end of June. So I've got to jump right in and bang that out in 6 weeks.
How do you do this? I just don't. Well, okay. So this will be the next question. What's your favorite writer, Phil? What's powering this machine that you are?
I love what I do. I mean, even though I didn't start with fiction, I've always wanted to be a writer. I mean, that was the thing that drove me. So even though my day job was, I was bodyguard for a while, I was this, I was that, I always wrote on the side. It was always, I did 1,200 feature articles, like thousands of fillers and reviews, about 20 nonfiction books. I did all of that stuff part-time while doing other jobs during the day. I was a college teacher for 14 years. So I taught at Temple University, taught women's self-defense, martial arts, history, and jiu-jitsu.
So you know your way around martial arts. You are
8th degree black belt, retired. Yeah, retired. None of my parts, I think, are original packaging. I've got plenty of screws and pins to put things together.
Well, there you go, cyborg martial arts.
Yeah, I what I could use in terms of science fiction is a time machine and go back to tell my younger self to stop doing some of the things that would result in me as a guy in my 60s, waking up every morning with aches and pains. Most people, if they have an ache, they can tell when the weather's going to change. At this point, I can tell when the weather's going to change in like the Dakotas.
Yeah.
So, I would tell that guy to, dial it down a bit. Get a job at Starbucks.
Don't do backflips.
It wasn't even so much that as working as the bodyguard, getting stabbed a lot, getting chopped in the shoulder with a meat cleaver. That was not as much fun as it sounds. Huh?
Have you written about that, about being a bodyguard?
I've mentioned it in interviews a lot. And I actually have a series of books that I sold to Simon & Schuster First one hopefully will be out in about a year or two. It's about a teenager who wants to grow up to be a bodyguard. So some of my stories are the things that happened to his parents and his uncle.
That's cool.
Names changed, of course. I won't be mentioning the celebrities I worked for.
Can I ask about shows and movies? You've touched on some hints. I want to know if you have any news that you can share.
Well, in a way, in development right now is Rotten Ruin, my teen post-apocalyptic zombie series. It is in development by Alcon Entertainment, who did they did Blade Runner 2049, Book of Eli. They do the Expanse TV show. So they're developing it. They're just about to start the third draft of the script. And they have one of the Marvel writers doing the script, and I can't tell you who, sadly.
Oh,
I want to, but I can't. And they're really excited about developing this into a feature film series.
great.
And so I'm pretty jazzed about it. So that's in the works. I've got another zombie thing in development in Canada with Blue Ice Pictures. It was a short story called Fat Girl with a Knife about a body positive girl who's being bullied because of her weight. She brings a knife to school to slash the tires of the bullies, and that's when the zombie apocalypse hit. So she winds up saving everyone, including the bullies, from the zombie. So they're developing that into they're going to do a movie of the week and then hopefully develop a TV series after it. And I'm pitching an adaptation of Nights of the Living Dead, which is a anthology that I co-edited with George Romero, the guy who directed Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And it's a TV series based on the anthology he and I edited. So we're just putting that pitch together. And then there's the thing that I'm doing with this other company, the prequel to the show, to this movie that was out 10 years ago that I'll be EP on, an executive producer on. So all of those things are in the work now, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff happening right now. And also Vin Diesel is reading my novel Ink, which is kind of cool because he's perfect to play the character of Monk Addison.
Oh, that would be pretty fun.
Ink is my most recent novel that was published.
Yeah. So, do you have a dream sci-fi writing project that you've not done yet that you'd like to do?
Yeah, I got a couple. Well, I have one that I would like to write the screenplay adaptation of, which is my book Mars One. Straight science fiction about the first families moving to Mars. And I actually, got to meet a lot of people from NASA and SpaceX and so on. They gave me some great advice on that. But I would love to write a science fiction TV series about rebuilding after an apocalypse.
Yeah.
Not the apocalypse, not the fall, but what happens when you have to start from zero, when there is no infrastructure left, the grid's gone, the satellites are gone,
right?
EMPs fried everything. How do you rebuild from there? I think it'd be an absolutely fascinating show to write, and it's one of the projects I would love to do. And I'd also like to do something about archaeology, about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the hunt for additional ones, because there's 11 caves they found the scrolls in, and almost certainly there are more because they've only excavated a fraction of it. The third thing I want to do is science fiction, a little more alien-oriented science fiction about megalithic structures around the world, and build in some of the conspiracy theories about how they're really from aliens and so on.
Yeah.
Kind of write that. So there's a bunch of projects, and I actually just signed to do a new science fiction project. Weston Oakes, who was a good buddy of mine, he and I just closed a deal, a really nice deal, to do the first three of a new series of military science fiction novels in a universe I created called the Sleepers Universe. The quick premise is, in the future, we've solved interstellar travel. Like bam, 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 we can go anywhere. Got this highway of these little kind of like wormhole sort of things. And we encounter a race, there's a war, bird-like aliens, and we're fighting to the edge of extinction. We develop super soldiers that are genetically designed to just destroy. They're so fierce, the enemy sues for peace. And one of the conditions is, they will not only rebuild everything they've destroyed, they will become essentially our servants, almost like a slave race for us, in exchange for the super soldiers being put to sleep. And they were put in cryosleep. 300 years later, when the aliens are so indispensable that we've become like a leisure class, kind of like the Eloi and the Morlocks in Time Machine.
Yeah.
Then they rise up and conquer us all because we are so far away from where we have nothing, and they've managed to edit out of human history the knowledge that the sleepers or super soldiers are still out there.
Hmm.
One historian goes and finds them, begins waking them up, and I get to play with some science about sleep, because in the theories of what will become hypersleep, we don't know whether hypersleep would shut down dreaming.
Right.
We hope it would, because they would be asleep a long time. Well, what if it doesn't? What happens to the human mind if it is dreaming for centuries? What happens if it's having nightmares for centuries?
That'd be hell, yeah.
Yeah, and when they wake up, are they even human anymore? So each sleeper groups that wake up, some are kind of normal, where the cryosleep worked. Some are the dreaming gods. Some are nightmares, and they're as much a threat as the aliens we're fighting. So that's what Wes and I are going to be writing together.
Sounds like a really good one. That's going to be hard sci-fi, but delving into some interesting psychological stuff.
Which is I love to do.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Let's get into some more meat in terms of writing. And I like to ask this question: what's the worst writing advice you've ever received?
Oh, geez. Worst writing advice I ever got actually was a business bit of writing advice. It was awful. When I first decided I want to do fiction, I started asking, I was going to a writer's conference. I asked different writers who had agents what their advice was for getting an agent. And they all told me the same thing. They said, well, because you're a beginner in fiction, you should shoot for an agent who's kind of low level, because they're the only ones who are going to take a flyer on a new writer. And I thought, wow, that's incredibly bad advice, because essentially what I'm saying is, well, I'm mediocre, damn it, and I'm going to defend that by getting the entry-level agent, and that's all I can expect, and that's where I'm going to go. And I thought it was just bad advice, because my book wasn't even sold yet. I had no proof at all that this book would not sell. So why should I assume that it's going to be that difficult? So I went up going the opposite. I reached out to the 10 top agents in my genre of my first novel, which was Gothic horror, American Gothic horror. And I spent 2 days writing a query letter, making sure that it was a business letter and not a love letter to my book, because that's a mistake a lot of writers make.
Wow.
We ended up getting 6 of the 10 agents to ask to see fuller partials, got 3 offers of representation. And the one who, when I talked to her, I told her that I had no idea what I'm going to write next, but it's probably going to be a different genre. And she said, well, she said, there is nowhere you can go that I won't be able to represent you.
Wow.
And it turns out, I thought she was a full agent by herself. She was with a massive agency, Trident Media, but she was the foreign rights agent representing doing foreign sales for Tom Clancy, Deepak Chopra, and
Whoa.
Dean Koontz. So, she was top of the game in terms of what she knew, but she was just starting to build her own list for Trident. So,
Okay.
that's massive. And so I signed with her, and Sarah Crow, she's now with Pippin. She's moved a couple of times. She is now one of the top agents in the business. I drop her name to other agents. They're like, wow. And, she has sold, like the novel I finished yesterday was my 41st. She sold the next 11 books for me.
Next 11.
Next 11, which, by the way, I have to write a little over 2 years. I'm insane. And people wonder why writers drink, right? I mean,
oh yeah, show me what you're having.
I'm drinking appropriately writer's tears. Very good Irish whiskey. And cheers. I don't drink much, but I drink good. And so she and I have had a lot of fun. She's sold, let's see, horror, thriller, mystery, young adult, middle grade, science fiction, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, Weird West, media tie-in, comic books, graphic novels, and board games for me.
That's awesome.
And she helped me get hooked up with my film agent, who is Dana Spector at CAA. So yeah, that's, you can't get better than CAA. So I've got really a couple of really powerful professional, both women, who are my agents in this. And it's like having top-notch gladiators, because as nice as they are ruthless as hell.
Well, that's what you need, though, right? I mean, it
really is.
So you don't want to be a wallflower. You got to get out there and get it done.
I don't. And I grew up as an introvert. I got over it. I've become comfortably extroverted, and because of my journalism training, and probably because of martial arts training too, I'm disciplined enough that when I sit down to write, I'm going to write 3 to 4,000 words every single day. That's high output.
Yeah.
So the last couple of years, I've been writing 4 novels a year plus short stories and comics. And my agent is able to keep moving me around. Like right now, we're about to sell something to Audible. It's an Audible original. We're discussing graphic novels to continue my Rotten Ruin series with Simon & Schuster. She's able to jump back and forth all these different types of projects while still having a list of fantastic other writers.
That's impressive that she's able to just go back and forth between genres like that. It doesn't seem that common.
No, it's not. And we're well suited to one another. We both are multitaskers. We're both high output, and we both have more energy than is probably sane.
Can you tell some of that to the rest of us?
I wish I could, because I have a buddy who writes one literary mystery novel about every 3 years. That's the speed he likes. That's not going to get you, the career he wants. And I want everyone to have as much fun as I do, and to make the money and have the lifestyle that I have. I want all my friends to do that.
So if somebody's just starting out, what's the best advice that you can give them in the writing world?
I'm going to share a bit of advice Ray Bradbury gave me. He said, understand the difference between writing and publishing. Writing is an art form. It is the intimate conversation between writer and reader. And because of that, you can go anywhere where you want, because the art that you are creating, you are the god of that universe. It is yours to do whatever you want. Publishing is a business whose sole concern is selling copies of art. Mm-hmm. It is not, they are not there to fall in love with your book. They are there to see the sales potential of it and buy it if they think they can sell a lot of copies, and not buy it if they don't. And by understanding the difference between the two, and understanding how the publishing industry as a business works, you don't get your feelings hurt. If something gets rejected, it gets rejected. For example, I pitched when Audible asked me for something to pitch. Last year, I did a serialized novel for Audible, Bewilderness, also science fiction, dealt with interdimensional physics. And they asked me originally to pitch a serial novel to them. I pitched 5 novels to them, including Sleepers, by the way, which is the one we just sold to some other publisher. Of the 5, Bewilderness is the one they wanted. The other 4 they rejected. Well, those are rejections of works that I felt really passionate about. I would have loved writing, but they were looking for one thing, and they bought the thing they were looking for. That's publishing. So that's a great bit of advice. A couple other real quick things, bits of advice for writers. One, don't let anyone talk you out of it, because friends and family will tell you how hard it is, how much rejection it is. Yes, we know all that. We know that before we write word 1. You do not need to keep telling us that. We get it. How about a little encouragement? And if you don't have encouragement, shut the fuck up, because we need the encouragement. So that's one thing. Second is, I really, really, really advocate that writers, especially beginner writers, not revise until they have a completed first draft. Right. Because you start revising, and that's a hole down which you will fall for miles.
Just get it down, get the writing done.
Yeah. Because the part of you that writes the first draft is kind of your Kirk. It's all passion and ego. It's my novel. But the part that revises it is Spock. The analytical, critical side of it. You can't have both of them running the Enterprise at the same time. Only one person fits in the command chair. Let the art run first, get the analytical part to run second, and then maybe have a committee to do the last draft. But don't revise until you have a first draft. And then when you get that first draft, go buy yourself something nice, because you have done something very damn few people, percentage-wise, have ever done. Less than 1% of people who start a book finish it. Less than 1%.
Well, and then you've just finished this massive novel yesterday. So how are you going to celebrate?
In the pre-COVID era, family would go out for a nice dinner or something, or I'd get together with some friends. But today, my idea of celebrating is I tidied up some of my office a little bit. It doesn't look it, but it's actually tidier than it was. I went out, bought some clothes. I did a little walking, I puttered around without having to feel that I was, locked, chained to my laptop. And also, I bought myself a present in advance of finishing it. I bought myself a desktop computer, which will be here in a couple of weeks,
Good.
because I found over the last year of sitting here, writing on a laptop, is there's a reason I'm getting a headache almost every day, because I'm hunched over looking at my laptop. So I splurged, and my gift for this year for doing this book is to buy myself a new computer.
Well, and then you can make more books with the computer. So it pays for itself, basically, right?
Yeah, and it's a business deduction, which my accountant's happy about, but and it should be cool too, because it's going to make it a little more comfortable, which means I may wind up having fewer neck or back issues while spending longer hours at my computer. And this
Yeah.
year is going to be a crazy year for writing.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Well, if we are about to wrap it up, so I wanted to know if there's anything else you'd like readers to know or that I haven't asked.
Yeah, actually, there's one thing it's not science fiction, but I'm really proud of is I'm now the editor for Weird Tales magazine. Like there's a copy on the wall behind me. It was a magazine that was introduced to me by Sprague de Camp, who was a great fantasy writer. He lived in Villanova, PA, and he was one of my mentors as a kid. And it would launch the careers of H.P. Lovecraft and Manly Wade Wellman. Ray Bradbury sold for some of his first things to Weird Tales. Robert E. Howard created Conan for Weird Tales. So it's a very legendary magazine, and it's had some great editors. Anne Vandermeer, who is one of the greatest editors of the magazine, had a run on it that was Hugo and Nebula award winning, and I wound up being the editor of it now. So the new issue 364, is available if you go to weirdtales.com. Has great stories by Shauna McGuire, Dacre Stoker, grandnephew of Bram Stoker, wrote a Renfield story for it, and Joe Lansdale and a bunch of other folks. And we have a new issue, which I'm putting together right now, which will have stories by a lot of women writers, Fran Wilde, Alma Katsu, and a bunch of others are going to be doing stories for it. And then we're working on issue 366, which will be out at the end of the year, which will be Swords and Sorcery. And Michael Moorcock, one of my favorite writers of all time, is going to let me have an exclusive excerpt of the new Elric novel.
Oh, wow.
The 50th anniversary of Elric.
Amazing.
When I told the other contributors that they're going to be in there with Michael Moorcock, they all but shot themselves, because that's a high bar. The guy's been, cranking out these incredible fantasy novels forever. So I'm having fun with Weird Tales. So please check it out.
Will do. Thank you. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. So thank you so much for being part of this, and on.
Thank you, Diane. And I've been fortunate to be able to be a friend of yours, and also to read and blurb a couple of your books. And you're the kind of science fiction writer we need in this genre. So
thank you.
Bravo to you as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Take care.
My pleasure. Bye.
Astra.